Good day, everybody. This is the CIGS Foreign Policy and National Security TV program. Today, again, we invited Rabbi Cooper, a friend of mine, and also a distinguished human rights fighter, I would say, in the United States. And today, I'd like to talk about Japan's role in this world, seen by the Jews in America. How we do things, Japan, especially in the Middle East. What can we do, or what we should not do, or how we understand the plight of situation of the minorities in the United States, including the Jewish Americans. Welcome.
Thank you.
Rabbi
Good to be back.
So what do you think? How do you see the Japan's role being played in this crazy world?
Yes, well, it is in many ways a kind of crazy world, but try to make some sense of it, not on behalf of American Jewry, but on behalf of one American Jew, myself. I don't speak, I obviously speak for my organization, but I don't pretend to speak for the entire community. One of the things I think that's important for Japanese people to understand, not from a conspiratorial point of view, but actually from a positive point of view, there's a reservoir of goodwill about Japan, about a country that rose from the ashes after World War II, that has embraced and strengthened democratic values, that is America's #1 ally in this part of the world. You might say that for economic now, but for other reasons, you have two democracies. Yes, kind of, you might say, almost connected at the hip. It was, obviously I had no idea when we set the time for our meetings here in Tokyo, they would come just days after your Prime Minister was in Washington.
Right.
And preceded immediately by the Foreign Minister and Defense Minister. And what is emerging is really quite remarkable. In large measure, well, I would say there are three reasons why this has happened. Mm-hmm. One, up north, this guy named Vladimir Putin. Mm-hmm. A lot of Americans don't even know that there's still, sensitivities about territory between Russia and Japan. Number two, you have a very aggressive regime in Beijing. It's your big neighbor next door. You can't deflect from that reality.
No.
And their behavior has been aggressive, in some ways, bordering on the genocide with the Uyghurs, mm-hmm. and human rights policies targeting Christians, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of bad stuff going on. And then third, you have the lunatic in North Korea who keeps flinging missiles over your territory. So what that has meant is, I've come to Japan quite often, and I know for years and years a very healthy debate about what to do about the Constitution, to change it. Does Japan have to go the way of, serious spending in defense, et cetera? And it was answered by those three people. Mm-hmm. I would say really not a matter of choice. When you are a leader of a nation, your first responsibility is to keep your citizens safe.
Right.
In order to do that, there's now a series of bilateral and multilateral relationships that are going to be hardened and developed openly without apology. And I think would be continued no matter who is a prime minister moving forward for the foreseeable future. And that means, whether you like it or not, Japan now emerges as an extremely important global partner in the area of how do we maintain a peaceful setting in a world that is becoming more and more threatening to the well-beings of our various democracies. And by the way, included in this package is another wonderful positive development, one that's 180 degrees from what I discovered here in 1985 when it came to Israel and Jewish people.
Right.
You now have not only great business relationships that are blossoming between Japan and Israel, but on security issues as well.
Right.
So
finally,
right, it's like being pregnant for 20 years. But I think the bottom line is that for the average American citizen, and obviously for American Jews also, they'll be looking at Japan much more carefully in the future, because now you're talking about a partner in terms of keeping the peace. It doesn't mean that Japan is going to become the cop of Eastern Asia anytime soon, but it does mean that there's an understanding that a democratic partner is there,
right,
and what it says and does is going to have an impact on people as far away as the U.S.
I've been quite encouraged by your remarks, but having said that, the appreciation of those Mr. Kishida's visit to Washington, etc., is not always echoing in this in this country. Sometimes, well, all politics is local, so probably there are some critics, but I think what he's been doing is quite remarkable. And then, but at the same time, what you said, if I had heard that 10 years ago or 15 years ago, I could have thought that it could be a lip service or something like that. But this time, I think it's more serious and real. And what I'm telling my audience these days is that, before the collapse of the Soviet Union, Americans fought the Cold War in Europe, but they didn't need us. And during the war on terror, you were fighting there, and we helped you, but you didn't need us. You could do it all by yourself. But here, when it comes to Indo-Pacific, which means deterring a huge nation in our neighborhood, that means that you need us and we need you for the first time since 1945 seriously. Because in order to defend and deter whatever actions, we need to be able to work together. So this is the big change. So I'm very much encouraged by that. But when it comes to the Middle East, we're still, I was an Arabic language officer, so I can tell you honestly. Well, they mean leaders or I would say ordinary people in my country only pay attention to the Middle East when we have a war, we have kidnapping, yes, we have terrorist attack. In those times, we get attention. But other than that, it's every 10 years we get attention. We got a war in Iran-Iraq war in 1980. In 1991 is the Gulf War. In 2003, the Iraq War. These are the times when the Arabic language officers, the Turkish language officers, Persian language officers, Hebrew language officers, the Middle East hands are under the spotlight. What do you think?
When it comes to Japan and the Jews, it's an interesting and complicated relationship.
Right.
But I think that we are looking for a true transformation, and that happens in two ways. Number one, we need more tourism back and forth so that we can degrade the stereotypes that are still there on both sides. Mm-hmm. And now that El Al will start flying, and I imagine eventually Japanese carrier as well, that could be well underway. What has been frustrating to the cheerleaders like myself of positive relationships is that we don't always see it play out in the diplomatic front. We don't see it played out necessarily in the votes by Japan in the United States, various UN agencies. And that, we hope, is going to change, because Japan has much more leverage, for example, with the Palestinians that they want to use there's no stomach to really get involved, but yet the subventions that go as a donor nation to UNRWA and the horrible pro-terrorist death culture that's embraced by the education that taxpayers in America pay for, taxpayers in this country pay for, in terms of behavior modification as a stepping stone for real peace negotiations, sooner or later, Japan has to play that role. If it doesn't, we're going to have another generation of brainwashed young people who don't embrace peace.
Right.
And then the other key element is, and we brought it up in all of our meetings, there is an internationally accepted definition of anti-Semitism. Mm-hmm. It's called the IRA, for the International Holocaust Remembrance Association, the IRA definition of anti-Semitism. We need Japan to adopt this definition. There are over 25 countries that have already done it. Mm-hmm. Now, the good news is I could walk around this country at 2 o'clock in the morning, as I often do, looking for an open 7-Eleven. Mm-hmm. No one's ever attacked me since 1985. No one. It's the safest place to walk. So it's not that we need the law in Japan to protect Jews who live in Japan from anti-Semitism. Uh-huh. We need the moral leadership globally, because we have, in the United States, 63% of all hate crimes, right, target 2.4% of the population. That's us. Right. London, Berlin, Paris, the major cities in the world where Jews live, they feel more comfortable being in Dubai than they do being in London. Mm. So we need the global players, and Japan is, if nothing else, because it has its checkbook open to the Middle East, we would like to see an evolution in attitude and more proactive steps to help set the stage for peace.
Okay. Well, let me make some comments. Number one, there's no anti-Semitism in my country. You know why? Because we have no Semitism. Because we don't have a Christian background. So there's no misleading statements or some discrimination from the beginning, because we don't have Semitism. Well, Semitism comes from the Christians. And that's the reason why you're safe in the morning.
I'm safe in the morning, afternoon, evening, and late night, but there is a book called The Protocols of the Elders of Zion that was migrated into this country from White Russia during the end of the...
It came from abroad.
Correct, but
it's not our indigenous argument.
Yes, but it has had a lasting, almost like a toxic or nuclear atomic waste has an afterlife. And when I first came here in the mid-'80s and the early 90s, there were many books that used that theme.
Oh, yeah.
And they were selling 200,000 copies of these books. If the economy was too hot, it was the Jews. If it was too cold, it was we were blamed or given credit for almost anything on the planet. Right. Thankfully, in 2023, that's not the issue. But what we need, and I'm hopeful that we'll begin to see that kind of change as we get to know each other better.
Have changed
is that intervention.
Thanks to you. I mean, you see, as I said, we are too naive because there was no Semitism at the beginning. That means at the same time, we are so vulnerable to those propagandas because we do not have a background. So education is extremely important, but at the same time, second thing I want to tell you is that the relationship between Japan and Israel has remarkably progressed. But when I joined the Foreign Service in 1978, that was the year we had Camp David Accord. And then at that time, we made a serious mistake in 1972 when we virtually froze relationship with Israel. That was the biggest mistake, in my personal view, in our foreign policy, especially the Middle East policy. But it took us more than 1972, I would say 15 years, for us to be able to send our foreign minister back to Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. So, but at that time, many in the Japanese business especially were concerned about the so-called Arab boycott. But they are gone, virtually, in my view. So recently, over the past 10 to 15 years, I think the Japanese businessmen and scholars and politicians alike are all aware of the importance of Israel, technology-wise, policy-wise, and of course economic interest-wise. So, but one thing I really wanted to ask you today is the Abraham Accord. It's not your accord, their accord. Abraham Accord, which enabled Israel to have a better relationship with some of the Arab countries. Additionally, why Arabs recently changed their mind? Why do you think they not discard Palestinians, but Palestinians are not put aside, but why do you think those Arab countries started paying more attention?
Two reasons, and you may be surprised what I'm about to say. Two people get credit for the Abraham Accords. President Barack Obama and the Ayatollah Khomeini.
Interesting.
Because when the new president back then in his first term signaled in his speech in Cairo a pivot, signaling the Muslim Brotherhood that he believed that they could be a moderating force in the entire region, that got countries like the United Arab Emirates, which is located 20 kilometers from Iran. Okay, they live right there. A real sense of panic because they saw the United States move from its traditional role of we sell you the oil, you give us the nuclear blanket, and that was broken by President Obama because, in my opinion, a flawed view of the realities on the ground.
Oh, I thought you were going to say Mr. Trump.
No. Meaning that what happened was that the threats made by Ayatollah Khomeini over and over and over again, and sending support for terrorists in these different countries, that is what brought this embrace, the sped up an embrace between the Sunni nations there and the Israeli Jews, because of the existential threat on the one hand from Iran, and the question of like, well, what's going to happen with the United States long range? It looks like things may be changing in a fundamental way. The Palestinians had 70 years of nonstop support from these nations, and they had very little, if anything, to show for it. You know, some people care more about them, some people care less about them. But when you have an existential threat in front of you, excuse me, Palestinians, you guys got to figure it out on your own. I got to take care of my back. And then the other element is, once they started talking with each other, and we were, Wiesenthal Center, myself, we were a little bit involved in two of those nations, in the building blocks and, towards peace. When they saw the potential economically, meaning, they have new partners now for defense, but you can also be more successful in making money. Then they said, well, this is very interesting. And what's fascinating is that since that peace treaty was signed, 450,000 Israelis have already gone to the UAE as tourists. There is this pent-up curiosity on both sides that we hope will be...
have they visited UAE with the Israeli passport?
Oh, absolutely. In the last 4 months, for a variety of reasons, I couldn't get to Jerusalem for the Sabbath, for Shabbat. I don't travel on the Shabbat, right? I landed up having twice in 5 weeks. Let's see, I had one Shabbat in Bahrain because I was invited when the Pope came to speak there with the head of Al-Azhar University. And 2 weeks later, I was in Dubai for Shabbat with about 100 other Jews having services. And so the transformation there is so profound and so sort of, and there's one other element, and this is really, I think, the key, long range, beyond Jews and Arabs.
Right.
Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, all these countries, you know what they need? They need jobs for the younger generation.
Right.
If they can't begin to throw off jobs, they're all going to become failed states. So the investments with the Israelis on the high tech is not just because they want to make a buck, and they do, but because they want to create an environment that maybe young people have some hope that they'll be able to have a future.
But do you think that the Palestinians have missed a golden opportunity some time ago, or?
I attended the Economic Forum in Bahrain that the United States, they delivered an unbelievable 3 days on a platter. All of the big players were there ready to explain to the Palestinians how to float the boat. They boycotted.
They boycotted?
They boycott. It's sort of like someone is, you're getting married and a rich uncle sets the party and you don't show up. So it's going to take more time with the Palestinians, but the signal from the other Arabs is, look, we're still Arabs, we're still Muslim, we care, but we care more about our own backs and our own lives. And that's a reality that many Palestinians understand, but Mahmoud Abbas and the Hamas, they, you know, as long as the donor nations keep pouring in the money, they're not going to change their tune.
Well, finally, before we close, I'm interested in one specific sensitive question. You see, you said that the UAE is interested in Israel in terms of security as well. Well, I'm afraid to say, I'm not supposed to say this in public, but the Iranians are developing nuclear weapons. Maybe if they, I don't know whether they really have a weapon, once they have a weapon, but they want to be ready to make a weapon within 5 minutes or something.
Right. Plus they have their friends in North Korea already have dozens.
So what if the enrichment rate reaches 90%? The Americans may not react.
Right.
Do you think that there's any sort of a military operation from the Israeli side?
So that is obviously the number one issue. What is interesting in the last few weeks and months is that the American military's made no secret of joint exercises with the Israelis and in some cases with the Gulf states. So that the Iranians know about it. What the big question is, will the political will exist in the United States to actually go and take care of business? Israel has stated they're not going to let the Iranians have the bomb. Now, what they've shown in the past is that doesn't mean they're necessarily going to bomb something. There are all sorts of intelligence and other kinds of operations. But one thing is for sure, and you know, we pray to God that it doesn't happen that way. But the Israelis, the Saudis, the UAE, and the Egyptian, they can't allow that fundamental status quo to change, because once they have the bomb, they have the blackmail that they need in order to go and impact. So there is the big X factor, and let's give credit where credit is due. The men have done nothing in decades to change the reality on the ground in Iran. Women, teenage girls, they've led, we're now over 120 days into this protest. So the fact is that all of the countries in the Middle East, the average age of their citizens is very, very young. And you know, with social media and the internet, you can't hide anymore. the quality of life elsewhere. So, I think you used in one of your introductions the term expert. I reject that word, not only for me, but frankly for everyone else, unless you define experts as the people who sound really intelligent the day after things happen. In terms of predicting, who could have predicted I would spend 2 Sabbaths out of 3 in the Gulf, and one of them with Pope Francis? Who knew?
Well, we are supposed to talk about Japan's role in the Middle East, but we ended up with talking about Iran. I'm sorry.
It's all connected. It is all connected.
Well, thank you, Rabbi Cooper, for coming. And we had a really good discussion. I appreciate it. Well, the CIGS Foreign Policy and National Security TV program will continue focusing on important international issues. And I hope that you will appreciate our efforts by registering the channel or giving us more good appreciation. Thank you very much for coming today, and see you next time.